The St. Louis Blues master plan has been revealed. As general manager Doug Armstrong and head coach Jim Montgomery speak on their expectations heading into next season, revealing where players are going to play within the lineup and so much more. We're going to break down multiple quotes from both the general manager and head coach and what fans should expect with newly acquired players this offseason. So much more in this episode. You're not going to miss it. So with that, Darius, let's just hop straight into today, where we did see Doug Armstrong and Jim Montgomery speak a lot this summer on what they're expecting from key players, where players fit within the lineup, and it goes straight into Doug Armstrong saying, I'm hoping that we have turned the tide on the whatever, and we're starting to become a competitive team that's expectations on expectations and reasonable expectations of success. Now, this is a team that has been trending in the right direction season after winning the cup. We see them come in 37 and 38 after missing during the season they missed the playoffs. 43 and 33, and they jumped up to 44 and 30. This team is progressively getting better, but looking at the lineup, a more polished lineup, a lineup with a lot more depth, do you expect them to maybe even make a push for the 50-win plateau this season?
Yeah, I think that they are back. The St. Louis Blues have arrived once again. And I think that, Doug Armstrong had a great analysis of exactly what's been going on. They've been in a rebuild, retool, whatever you want to call it, I guess, at this point. I don't even know if you could really put your finger on exactly what's been happening the last handful of seasons since they've won the Stanley Cup, or I guess 5 years ago at this point. Time is flying. But I think that, they're back. They have arrived and they've gone through whatever that is. Obviously, guys like Alex Pietrangelo and Ryan O'Reilly are gone now, and you have younger players that have kind of taken up those mantles, like a Robert Thomas, who has, filled that role as a first line center. And then obviously your defense core is not necessarily younger. We've been talking about that all summer long, but it is a little bit younger now. And you have Tyler Tucker, who Jim Montgomery is a big fan of, who's probably going to have a bigger role this season. You have Logan Mailloux. We don't know exactly how they're looking to utilize him, but I think there's big plans in the works for him as well. So that's pretty exciting. But I would think that Doug Armstrong obviously knows his team, or knows this team and his team like the back of his hand. And it's true. I think that they're back. There's reasonable expectations for success heading into this season because of what happened last year. Of course, lightning in a bottle last season, right? You can't really account for that heading into this year. But with the roster they put together and how good I think everyone's feeling after the end of last season, I think it's reasonable to expect that they're going to make the playoffs. They should win a ton of games this year, and that they're going to push forward to make some noise in the playoffs, because if guys like Holloway were healthy, you're probably winning that series against the Winnipeg Jets. So should be pretty interesting to see how this season plays out.
And like you said, there's a lot of new players in the lineup. We know Mailloux, which Doug Armstrong did touch on, and we will cover that. But two new bodies they brought in on depth was Suter and Bukestad, and they certainly change our center ice complexion. Now with this, I know we've talked about it a lot. There could be a sense where Pius Suter does go to the wing, but it seems like Doug Armstrong is very content on having the four centers down the middle with Suter and Bukestad as the bottom six. Now looking at both players, we've spoke on them a bunch, so we won't stick too long, but Pius Suter coming in after having a career year with the Vancouver Canucks, signing on a perfect contract, a player that can play in your top six, middle six, bottom six, as a winger, as a center. He's a Swiss Army knife. Once again, no pun intended, but he fills in a positional need and is going to do an incredible job. And it goes straight into Nick Bukestad, who came off a tiny bit of a down year after putting up 45 points the year previous, but a big body with experience, not only in the NHL, but in the playoffs. Once again, Darius, looking at the center depth, I know a lot of people want to look at this and say, hey, Schenn might not be a second line center for the foreseeable future. He's someone that could bounce down to the third. But with this team being in a good spot to go out, acquire another player with their cap space, could you see the center depth doing very well until deadline, where we could see Doug Armstrong take a huge swing to add one more?
This center depth is very good. You could probably go into the playoffs with the center depth and you would be okay, I think, but they can add another player at center at the deadline, like you mentioned, if need be. Obviously, there's injuries over the course of a season. If something, obviously, you never want to see an injury, but if something does happen, maybe you have to fill at the defense position, right? Maybe you're filling at the goaltender position, right? We don't know until the season continues on. So we'll see what happens closer to the trade deadline. The one thing I do want to say is we see a lot of your comments down below. Braden Schenn, of course, is not going to be a second line center for much longer in this league, although he does have great use still and is a great playoff performer and plays the right way in the playoffs. I will say that you don't want to get rid of that player, that's for sure. But I think the plan at some point, it might not be this season, of course, obviously with all the center depth that they have, is for Dvorsky to be the second line center. That's a guy who does play center, and he should be a very effective player at the NHL level once he's done his development. Or you never really finish your development, I guess. You're always kind of developing new skills as the seasons go on. But obviously, once he's ready to graduate to the NHL level, and obviously, some of these guys and the contracts have expired, I think that's the plan. So moving forward, they do have a plan. I think that, if you talk about untouchables around the league, Dvorsky's probably one of the untouchables in the St. Louis Blues organization, because that's the plan going forward. But in terms of this season, starting the year, I don't think there's a need for you to go out and get another center. You did a great job via free agency doing that. But we'll see how the season plays out, and anything can go south, right, over the course of a season. So maybe you're figuring, hey, Suter's probably better suited on the wing for this team, maybe, and you have to go and get another center. That's possible, but we'll see how it plays out. I would go into the season for the first couple months, see how everything plays out with the current roster.
And what I love about this team, it's almost lined up for Steen taking a team that has contracts that will be expiring in 2 to 3 years, which opens up the gate for so many young players to step in within this lineup. And even going farther in, we've seen Doug Armstrong talk on Logan Mailloux. He's an excellent skater, got an excellent shot. We think he's NHL ready now. We've talked to him. I told him he'll have an opportunity. He has a job now. It's his job to come into camp and keep it. And going back into defense, yes, adding in more of a veteran defenseman, maybe on the third pairing or replacing Falk would be something Blues fans want, but you have a very competitive roster, a very competitive decor with Fowler, with Broberg on the left side. Of course, Parayko there. You could upgrade Falk. May use a young star in the making. This team is building very deep. And I mean, once again, Darius, listen, we know Bolduc was a fan favorite. He wasn't the best when it came to playoffs. It almost looked like he was extendable due to this. But do you think Logan Mailloux could end up developing in the next year or two, even into that second right-handed defenseman, where you're going to see a decor of Fowler, Parayko, Broberg, and Mailloux, and then you can fill up the rest with a little bit less cap than you're spending on Falk?
Yeah, and it's tough to say that about Bolduc too, because he was still so young, like 22 years old. You don't actually know what you have in that player for maybe another couple of years, although he was showing signs, right? But I think that this was a necessary evil trade. You need to get younger on the blue line. I think you needed another offensive piece that's a little bit more ready than some of the younger guys you have in the system, like a Juracek, let's say. So I think this makes a lot more sense for the St. Louis Blues with where the team is going and how much offensive help you have and coming up through the system. And I think Mailloux, I think a lot of fans should be excited about him. He spent a lot of time, obviously, in the AHL developing different skills last season. His point production took a hit for that reason, but I think the plan is to have him come in and be that power play quarterback. And maybe it's not to start the season, but maybe start easing him into that role so he can take over that in the future, because that is his game. He's a big body, underrated physically when, it comes to the playoffs and that more physical style of play, which the Blues want to do that. We know what type of team that they are going into next year and have been, and what, that caliber of hockey is to be a St. Louis Blues. So he brings that obviously with the offensive touch. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think he's ready to make the NHL this year, right? He spent a lot of time in the AHL. He spent some time in the NHL last year, but I think he's ready to make that leap. And, at some point you have to. So I think that he is ready. I don't think he's going to play top pairing minutes or anything. The lines are probably going to look similar to what we see on Puckpedia right now. So we'll see how that plays out and who's paired with who once the season starts. But I am interested to see kind of what his deployment is this year. Is he, on the power play as a quarterback right away? Is he on power play too? Like, what does that look like? I'm more interested to see what that looks like. But I think he's ready to take the next step. He should make the NHL this year. It's exciting. And again, I think it was a necessary evil trade.
And I think that's the big thing. You're bringing in a big defenseman that has a lot of offensive output, but even going into it, and there's two more quotes, so bear with us. He talked about the depth on the team at wing, how good the wingers are, Snuggerud, Kyrou, and then you get people like Booch and Holloway. It seems like an area of strength in our organization. We know the scoring this team had in the regular season. In the playoffs came a lot from the wing. Yes, Robert Thomas was their top producer, but you got a lot out of your wingers, which this team is very deep in. Looking at even the team they have, plus Carbonneau coming through the system. The bull in the china shop smashing his way into the NHL, and it gets straight into the expectation. Jim Montgomery said there's some areas of game that we need to get better on, the 5-on-6, which we don't want to talk about. But going in the training camp, setting the tone of this is how hard we're going to work. What is your expectations? Listen, going into next season, we want the Blues to win the Stanley Cup. We want a deep run. They showed life last year, taking the Jets to 7 with Jim Montgomery having a full season, do you think the Blues are just scratching the surface of this dynasty potential they could be going towards?
I think if you look at last year, so 365 days ago, I think expectations were much lower than they are right now. I think that's obvious between the fans and even expectations around the league. But heading into this season, I think it gets very interesting because the expectations are higher, but I think they're going to finish kind of around the same area that they did last year. They're either going to finish, to me, it's a hard division, right? It's an absolutely horrific division to be in. So, with how many good teams are in that division right now. So, I think they finish somewhere in like the third divisional playoff spot, maybe the first or second wild card spot, somewhere in that area. And I don't think that's unreasonable to say. I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs. I don't think they're one of the top two teams, right? So, somewhere in that area. We'll see how injuries and stuff like that affect other teams throughout the course of the season. So maybe they finish a little bit higher, a little bit lower than people think. But I think that's a reasonable expectation for the team this year. And to make a point on what you brought up too and what they were talking about, the scoring from the wings, I think if you're a team that relies on scoring from the center position and up the middle, you run into a situation, especially in the playoffs, that if lines start to cancel each other out and the matchup game, all of that stuff, that could become a problem. So having all your scoring on the wings, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing if you're really deep up the middle two ways. And I think that the Blues are that heading into the playoffs. Obviously, you have to make it to the playoffs, but I think that you can with scoring from a first line center like Robert Thomas. And then obviously what you have on the wings. Snuggerud has to have a big year, but we're all expecting him to. So, I don't think that's necessarily a problem when it comes to the playoffs, especially because that actually could open you up for more scoring.
And I mean, I think the biggest thing is, listen, Blues fans, we like to be underdogs. Look at 2019. No one in the league was expecting that. But what is your thoughts on this? What is your thoughts on how Doug Armstrong has constructed this roster in its final season as a general manager? How do you think Steen fears taking this team over? And with that, go down and leave a comment down below. And speaking of comments today, we'll hop straight into where Snuggy is going for 40 to 50 points in 82 games. It's going to be a hard adjustment. He could be a finalist for the Calder, and it's going to be hard to win. We know the Montreal Canadiens have Demidov. That's going to get top line minutes, probably going to run the offense, but Snuggerud is going to make noise. Next year is going to be exciting. Go down and leave a comment on your favorite player on this team. Who do you think has a breakout season? Let us know all that down below. While you're down there, leave a like, subscribe, share this with your friends. We'll be back in another episode, so keep your eye out for that. But I've been your host, Mark, with my co-host, Darius, and take care, Blues fans.